our next speaker. All the way from down under, we have Rodney Eggleston from Australia. Rodney is the co-founder of MARCH.STUDIO with Parisian graphic artist Anne-Laure Cavigneaux. MARCH.STUDIO represents a new generation of architects in Australia who have been educated in a digital environment but embrace the fundamental elements of making and innovation to realize their projects. The outcomes of this particular mix are highly crafted projects born and refined through the utilization of a digital and computational process, but also embedded in a thorough knowledge of materials and construction. So without further ado, let us put our hands together for Mr. Rodney Eggleston.
I'm Rodney Eggleston from MARCH.STUDIO. MARCH.STUDIO is based in Melbourne, in Australia. Thanks for having me. We're always looking for something insightful to add and put into our speeches. And as a result, we've got a little book going at the studio. When someone says something intelligent or remarkably kind of profound, it goes into the book. Julian Canterbury sort of asked the question a couple of days ago, why have cupboards? Why not just own good-looking stuff, basically? Julien Ibert is a Frenchman. He's pretty strong about his archi soccer. He says there's no judgment as long as we win. And the German who works with us, Wilco, he basically says that 99% right is still 100% wrong. The Germans are very precise like that. I was taking down some images of work recently, and one of the students said, "Why are you doing that? You're erasing March's history." And I said to him very profoundly, "We're creating a new history. It's called the future." So what is the future? Where are we today? The future for us is, today is pretty much the past. We find that most things that we do look back at the past for some sort of inspiration. Our building is from 1972. It's a brutalist concrete building, and it's been there for 48 years or 47 years, and today we occupy it. My house is also from 1972, so I started sort of finding all these 1972 similarities when I was going through that year and realising that some of the best music's made in 1972. And here we are all this time later trying to work out what that means. In 2019, we were asked to do the refurb for the lobby of that 1972 residential tower. And we did, and we wanted to do something that blended in with the building. We used materials that were available and techniques of the time. And the really interesting part was in the citation, it said it got heritage status because of its remarkably intact foyer that we had designed in 2018. The 70s were great for engineering. This is a great symbol of the 70s, the Volkswagen Beetle. I have a 70s Beetle. These cars are fantastic machines. They never, ever break down. They will go forever. I also have a 1972 Combi. So they either break down or they burst into flames. This is us trying to go on holiday recently. We're really interested in how technology can go into fabrication and manufacturing. And a lot of it for us comes out of our early beginnings. So March was born in 2007, which was the beginning of the global financial crisis. These were some of the images of that was starting to come out of America during that time. So this kind of failed capitalism, this beautiful idea that nature was beginning to reclaim the built environment was something that seduced us a lot. And an image from Andreas Gursky from 1999, which I saw in the Tate back then, that really captured this saturation of consumerism that we had got ourselves into, where the object just becomes this, it doesn't even become an object anymore, it just becomes this blur. Fast forward to where we are today, and we've managed pretty well to create a world where we have surrounded ourselves with refuse and with rubbish, and then also trying to come to terms with the environment and the way that we tame the world as it rapidly changes. A film that was great inspiration to us is Jacques Tati's Mon Oncle, and if you haven't seen it, recommend it. Talking about the failure of modernism and how modernism's basically going backwards, and that inherently it's more interesting to live in the village. Our first project really tried to take all of those ideas, and we set ourselves a task of making a project entirely out of found materials. It was called Section 8 Container Bar. It was supposed to be there for 6 months, and it's entering its 12th year or so. 2005, let's work it out, 14 years. Pretty simple. It's a couple of containers. One of them's a bar, one of them's a bathroom. Then there's some transport pallets. There were some umbrellas when we originally opened. Very strangely, it became a bit of an icon. It was just this stuff that it was gathered in a car park, but it started featuring on Melbourne City ads. You can see on the left row in the middle there, as this really iconic Melbourne place to go and see. And it received the front cover of Architecture Australia, which we were students at the time, so obviously we were thrilled. And then when we went through the magazine, we realised that we hadn't been credited, and they turned around and said, architecture, no, this is an urban condition. This is just growing overnight, hasn't it? And then we showed them drawings, and they realised that it had actually been designed, which was really interesting to us, and it's something that we try to feed back into our work constantly. This is it in 2019, so really it's all about setting up this aperture for other life to exist, for personalisation to come and occur, and it's unrecognisable from its original design, but it is still underneath all of that stuff. Another earlier project that was quite informative was the Pen Plan series. So this was basically building cardboard houses at 1-to-1 of different parts of the world, and then inviting children to come in and draw or scrawl what they thought it might be like to live on the other side of the world. This was a Chinese courtyard house, and the entire things were made entirely out of cardboard. This one sat outside for 3 weeks and thankfully didn't blow away or kill any children. But what we really enjoyed about these projects was the fact that you set up a blank framework for something to exist, and then over the top of that there's this kind of completely chaotic or unpredictable language that might begin to emerge. So what does our practice look like as a kind of DNA? These are the projects, these are the ones that actually got built, these are the ones that are still standing. Each project for us has really been an investigation into a material. We've self-taught ourselves through materials, and we believe that materials combined with technology is the future. So we've worked with paper, we've worked with old overhead projectors for a jewellery exhibition, yellow tracing paper. All architects would know yellow tracing paper. We've still got some of this at the studio that we use these days. Obviously lots of plywood, cardboard. So there's a skincare company called Aesop out of Melbourne who saw our cardboard houses and wanted some cardboard stores, so we did a couple for them. Again, plywood to create a bread basket for a baker. We've made an entire store out of cork in Zurich. There's been, this was a marquee for the Melbourne Cup, which was made out of pine, and every stick of pine was taken out of that structure and used on a house. There was a client who needed storage for 5,000 folders, so we turned to LVL beams and made his entire interior a bookshelf. Louis Vuitton, we used the straps inside their suitcases, or we tried. We actually lost this one to Louis Vuitton's in-house architects. Recycled timber, this is the subfloor from a chicken coop, turned into a shelter. Tasmanian oak, hoarding boards from Zurich. The Swiss still stand at the front door and ask if they're open. This is recycled timber that's dressed, there's recycled timber that hasn't been dressed and is used in exactly the way that we found it. There's burnt timber, there's timber dowel, you get the point. Steel tube, copper for Geneva, brass for a restaurant, anodised aluminium for this heritage foyer, fiberglass, which is a pretty interesting material to use and to cut, concrete, porcelain, string for a shop in Singapore, we called it Stringapore, rope, bricks, terracotta pots, we've done wire mesh, we've done bottles, we've done curved glass, we've done glass bricks. So that gives you a snapshot of what we've played with in the past. And if anyone has any other materials that they want us to get us to try to use, please come up and tell me about them, because we're running out of ideas, basically. For us, tomorrow is about manufacturing architecture, and this is kind of ironic because we're sitting in here and then next door there's a trade show where you can theoretically buy whatever you need for your building, right? Where we see architects and architects' power in the future is by managing that kind of going beyond the specifier, being the designer again, and really designing componentry for buildings. This is the warehouse in our studio, looking remarkably clean, I might add. It doesn't usually look like this. I was brought up in a boat warehouse where basically you spent all winter sanding back your boat and painting it so you could use it again for summer. So I'm sort of used to this idea of being around materials and making things out of materials. These are just some samples, a mixture of digital samples versus hand cast samples, an array of metalwork that we fabricate or get our suppliers to fabricate it. We invested in a CNC machine, which is a little bit more expensive than an A0 printer, but a lot more useful. When we bought this machine, we had no idea why we were buying it, and now we don't know how we'd live without it. This is us playing with some holographic technology, the hologram guys out of RMIT, who basically allow you with augmented reality to project a 3D model in space so that you can get welders or people to copy it. And for us, this is the future. I mean, 3D printing, we don't think that's going to get there. There's nothing better than a couple of sets of hands on site. But introducing digital technology so that we can use materials in different ways is really what interests us. So this is a sunglasses store that we as the architects actually built and gave to a builder, and he assembled it. And so we're very interested in the way that architects can be more involved with manufacturing and more involved with the construction side of it. A quick case study on a built project. This is a house in Brighton. This was how we found the site. This is what the client had purchased. This building apparently had planning approval, but it didn't fit in the res code envelope, which meant it didn't really have planning approval. It's a long site, so we designed a long house. We identified pretty quickly that the whole area is these kind of 2.5 metre walls with then something growing over the top. People down there are living in these kind of gated communities. We wanted to open it up, but we liked this idea of inverting the wall. The house becomes a kind of compound, a walled house. These are the early sketches of that. But then there's this notion that we give back to the street, creating a kind of mound where you can grow native grasses, or you can put sunflowers, or you can do something that adds back to the streetscape. That the setback of the building occurs where it normally occurs, but that the front of the building is given back. The client is a bit of a car collector, so it was all about how he entered with this scissoring garage door. That's the reality. And again, from the front. The plan on ground floor is all the living spaces. There's parking for 4 cars. He wanted 12. Managed to get him down to 6. There's another 2 underneath that. There's a living area, a kitchen, dining, and of course the swimming pool, and then the upper floors are the bedrooms, or as architects like to call them, the sleeping quarters. This is the land, so there's a basement we'll go through at the end. There's the wall as it begins to wrap around the building, and the wall is there also because we had to sink it down a metre to get into the planning envelope. And this is a system that's used on freeway barriers, so not really something that you would expect to see in a residential house. So again, we're still looking for materials from other industries and bringing them across to architecture because we think this is way better than a fence. There's the kind of other landscaping manoeuvres, the pool and the front blade. It's a long-standing thing in Melbourne. Architects are all competing to deal with the pool fence, and this was our attempt at that. These images are really dark, I do apologise for that. Maybe if we could turn these lights off. The ground floor, which is that living space that connects directly to the outside area, so that there's a kind of seamless conversation between the two and everything can be opened up. All articulated by these trusses, which give you the sense of being, I guess, more in a warehouse kind of conversion rather than a brand new house. And these trusses not only separate the two floors, but enable kind of future plants to be grown out across them and then across guy wires. And as you can see in the render. And really for us, it's about compartmentalising the building, imagining it as a series of pieces so that they can be built in a factory and brought on site, and we can have less time on site basically. This is the trusses going in. Separating this box above. So this box is veiled in copper, accessed from this common stair. This is the planning envelope as it comes into the space, so we thought we'd just express that rather than having a straight wall. We'll just express the planning envelope, and that means the doors do as well. The bathrooms are all pretty clean. We usually try to not have corners in bathrooms for cleaning purposes. And then the screen, which in 1,000 years might go green, was really inspired by a bamboo blind. So your humble bamboo blind that you can get from the hardware store that costs about $3.75, probably even cheaper here, have these fantastic deviations in them where they're linear and straight, but they've also got this kind of organic movement to them, which is impossible to replicate with materials such as steel. And the result of that is these fantastic shadows or light that hits through them and cascades into the building. So our first attempt via a model was really to try to replicate the bamboo blind using strands of copper, and understanding pretty quickly that copper is malleable and flexible. And then back to the computer to test that we weren't completely insane. This is the copper bar that we employed for the building. It's about 1.5 inches wide and about 3 millimetres thick. It's traditionally used in bus bars, in switchboards, so you wouldn't know it as a material. It comes in 6 metre lengths. And so then the whole design of the screen became about varying these prongs where you could slide the copper into it. And by varying the location of these and then water jetting them, we can sort of begin to control the accidental that we're trying to celebrate. The builders didn't want to build this, so we procured everything ourselves. We took the risk sending the drawings to them, and then we basically told them all you have to do is just clip it on. There's 2 points there. The verticals went up in a day, which was amazing. We'd already tested the copper. The key to attaching the copper is through this clip. So there's obviously nothing on the market that can do what we wanted it to do. So we ended up designing a clip. And in Melbourne and in Victoria, the car manufacturing industry has kind of ceased, but there's manufacturing industries there that are way more advanced than the building industry. We can send a 3D model to a company that used to make springs for a car, and a day later they'll send us back a prototype. There's a couple of thousand of these in the building. They cost 65 cents each, I believe. And they simply slide straight over the copper. The copper was all sourced because the owner was a metal man, so he got the copper, brought it to site. We sent some clips down there, which all came in ESOP boxes, which was kind of strange, from our factory. And the whole thing got installed in a week. So what looks like the most complex part of the building and the most defining part of the building was actually the quickest and the most cost-effective part of the building. And we just love the way that it changes with all the different light moods, the way in which it blends itself back into the landscape. And after that went off with that, after that was a success, we started looking to the basement area. We designed a theatre down there. This is the 2 AC Cobras that vanished down. Access to the basement is via a perforated stair. And we'd sort of imagined this back cave environment where he could sit down there and he could watch racing movies and then pull it up and look at his cars. The facets are all about kind of mitigating sound reverberation, and basically then looking at ways to build complex geometry. Might be as simple as designing a bracket. In this case, I think there's 11 different brackets, 11 plus 13, each one slightly folded to a different angle so that you can then, and obviously numbered, so that you can find and locate where it needs to go. And combining that with CNC technology means architects can build it, which means it's even cheaper again because architects are so much cheaper than builders. And so we ended up building this for them as the kind of the last thing that we did on the project. I'm going to quickly talk about GAV. I'll just have a look at how we're going for time. This is really a submission for a competition that didn't go ahead, but a project that really does, again, look at what you can do with manufacturing and how you can turn it into a piece of architecture. So the building was about this exploration and playfulness underneath this maze of cord that hung off a netted structure where children could run around. The year before we did this competition, this was the pavilion that was on site by John Mortal Architects, who's an amazing Australian architect. And we found out that the pavilion didn't have a future life, which is a bit of a thing in Melbourne at the moment. We design these incredible pavilions and we don't know what we're going to do with them. So we started looking into that, and we sort of started wondering how it might be given a new lease of life and how all that curved steel, of which there was a lot of it, might stay on site and get another year out of it. The inspiration, obviously the one on the left, turn it upside down, which is a fantastic Koolhaas trick when you don't know what to do and you've made the world's worst model. You just flip it upside down, it always looks better. The water cube in Beijing, which was designed by PTW, which is now a fun park, a fantastic fun park. The arches of the NGV, some commentary, some political commentary at the time. We hadn't had the referendum about gay marriage, so we wanted it to be about that. And then the interactivity of running through, some interactive installations. So off come the pieces of the leaves, so to speak, from John's structure. We pick it apart with a couple of spider cranes, sorting out the pieces, flip it upside down, and then begin to reattach those internals back to the outside of it to create something that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to perceive if not for using John's original piece. Stretched a net over the top of it and then began to articulate some usable space underneath that could be booleaned out to create different areas. There's an idea of that maze that we talked about earlier, that it can also act as an amphitheatre at night. so that people can sit there and watch a film festival. And there was an idea that it might also have a future beyond being a pavilion and be taken out to suburbia and turned into a park. As I mentioned, there's been this bit of this trend, and it happens with a lot of our work, that they become backdrops for wedding photography. So we thought, okay, let's make the ultimate backdrop for same-sex marriage, which has now been passed in Australia. At night, a sense of how it might glow. The pavilion, the amphitheatre is you sort of set yourself up on the net. This thing that sort of has landed seemingly from outer space, sitting within the garden where people can sit and watch all sorts of movies. We designed an architectural film festival. Took us a lot of time to come up with that list. So you could obviously sit there and watch an inflatable screen. All sorts of different events programmed into it. A speaker's corner. The jury at the time asked us, how does this keep sun off people? And after we did a series of sun diagrams which proved it didn't keep sun off people, we just said, well, we'll just distribute these hats and everyone can wear them and celebrate everything that is GAV. The sculptures could have hats on them as well. And that was our way through that little curveball that they were trying to get us with. The cord was an incredible process, again, working with a local manufacturer, Bruce, who was based out in Mordialloc. Bruce, we went to with this diagram because we'd established pretty quickly that you could only get 8 colours in the rope that we were looking at using. And but then we thought if we vary the threads, so there's 8 threads in each one, we can sort of begin to get a rainbow effect out of it. We started thinking about the future use of what could happen to the pavilion afterwards. Obviously, art galleries these days are just massive gift shops. So we suggested that you could take a bit of GAV home with you, that there'd be GAV dog, GAV jump, GAV shop. These are the samples that Bruce made for us. We sort of said, can you just give us like a metre of each colour? And he said, no, I've got to run like 400 metres in each colour, otherwise it's a waste of time. So he gave us all this material to test and play with, and it was all looking pretty magnificent. These are just images of a suspended sample. GAV had its own Instagram account because it's obviously not buzzworthy unless it's on Instagram. And we played around with some lighting as well. That was GAV. Another quick project, again, I'll just quickly have a look at time. Lakeside Discovery Centre. So there's a train in Melbourne up in the hills called Puffing Billy, which you probably, can't say around here. This is us trying to pretend that we're working for Puffing Billy. So we took the entire consultant team, the acoustic engineer, the hydraulic engineer, the planners, and photoshopped hats on them. Obviously, you could see we didn't have an idea at this point in time. This is the proposal, the plan. Lakeside Station is it's about middle way through the entire trip, and the idea of the building was really trying to capture the thrill of being on a steam-powered train. This is a miniature train that I'm on here taking photos that go through a concrete pipe out in Eltham. With also, this is Puffing Billy going over one of the bridges, and all the children hang out and scream and people take photos from below. It's seriously one of the best things that you can do as a 7-year-old. And I think everyone from Melbourne remembers doing it when they were a kid. With also then this kind of the banality of children rolling down hills. Those were the 3 big ideas. And then we just sort of said, well, we'll just make it look like the infrastructure, that we'll use the kind of utilitarian detailing of the railway. We'll repair the landscape because the landscape had obviously been traumatised by years and years and years of kind of oil spilling all over it. The site is really an edge condition. It's the edge of a road, it's the edge of a railway, it's the edge of a lake. And when we draw the railway, we realise pretty quickly that it's a curve, and it's a perfect curve because it's a railway and it's made in a factory and delivered to site, and that all sort of makes sense. So why wouldn't the building be arced like the same way that the corner is? And then we arrange these chambers, giving them all a different program, beginning to connect them together, bury them underground, let the landscape come through over the top. Then another volume sits above that. It's in a rainforest, which we know rains a lot. So the second building sits above and shelters you from 95% of the time when it's raining. The access with big buses and getting school kids in, and then aligning that top building with existing buildings that talk about the view to the lake. They wanted a rooftop deck. So this is a series of diagrams that shows how undisruptive the whole construction process is, that this thing just comes and starts boring in piers, and then a couple of excavators work away. And you can see the train's actually got the arcs on it. So the idea was we could build the entire thing from the railway, and each arc, precast concrete arc, could come in and be delivered. And as you begin burying these tubes or these chambers underground, you start infilling back over the top so that there's no kind of spoil going off site. The lower chambers are connected by a central stair and an elevator. And then this is just, that's the tree protection coming away. Fenced off so children don't fall off it. The mid-level has this this bridge that connects the lower and the upper together, and also is the moment that school children can gather and also get the first glimpse of the train. Like, it's really important when you get to Puffing Billy to see the train as soon as possible. And then there's a restaurant / function centre that sits above that, that's clad off, and then a link to the existing station. The landscaping is a really weird situation. We have native landscape on one side and introduced landscape on the other side, and it was all about completely demarcating those two kind of situations. This is the approach if you come via bus with this kind of concrete canopy. You can see the bridge sitting between the two volumes. That begins to be the steam room. So basically children are invited to drop all their bags off and then run down this thing and hopefully not kind of scald their face off as the steam comes past, but get as close to the train as possible. The arches we've been trying to make into architecture for a while. Again, they're off the shelf, so they get made by, they're designed by a Swiss company, but they're also locally fabricated. You can see that there's a variety of different sizes that you can use. We chose that one because it was the proportions that best fit a train. So there was an idea that you could also put a train in one of the tunnels in the future if you wanted to. This is just going through the various areas. The restaurants, the ticket booth, that linking stair, the gift shop, which you have to have, some learning spaces, a theatrette. The theatrette is left in its concrete. It's then got timber that basically talks about the station. The floor we discovered we could make out of railway sleepers if we CNC'd all the kind of years of grit off them. And then the exhibition chambers themselves, which had moving exhibitions that were rolling back and forth. That section gives you a sense of the existing station and the proposed. And you can see that kind of elevated floated form, which really, we've done the tunnel, now we're looking at the bridge, and so we start looking at bridge kind of construction, and you know, bridge architecture isn't a new thing. Switching stations, the building on the right is a Robin Boyd house in Melbourne, which is very famous to any architect. But ultimately it came back to the bridge that is the bridge that you played with when you were a kid with your model railway. I think everyone around the world had one of those plastic bridges, and looked at basically using the steel truss as a way of articulating the entire space and giving you that feeling that you really are around these trains. So that was Puffing Billy. That is not the end. Don't get excited. I think we've got time for one more. So tomorrow's community. What is tomorrow's community? We were recently asked to design a community centre. Again, this was a competition we did win, so we're not just always losing, which is nice. This is in Tasmania, which is even further south than Melbourne, for those who don't know. Tasmania is actually moving away from Australia, and we're trying to catch it because we love it down there. This is the building that we were presented with in the competition, and the local council said you can use this or you can demo it, you can do whatever you want, but it's there. They had this idea that they'd put the new building beside it. We had an idea that we should try and use as much as what was there as possible. These are a pretty typical council diagram that we often do to get people on board. Lots of images of people having fun, put it in a circle, make it then a coloured square, bring all the squares together, jam them in around a couple of things that look like spaces, and then you have a community centre. What it basically meant was they had no idea why they were building the building. They were getting some money from the government and they had to spend it by a certain time, and it was really difficult trying to understand how they were going to use it. So it became this really flexible building that was oriented to the sun and that would deal with the prevailing winds. This is the old Kingston High gym that we had. We sort of removed all the lightweight material, all the asbestos went, and basically kept the foundations, the slab, the columns, and began to use them as the grid that the entire building would be set up from. There's some outhouse buildings that begin to appear. Really, there's an information centre. These are kind of auxiliary kitchens and co-working environments. There's a cafe. Really, it's about this space here, which is how do you create a situation where you've got an air-conditioned area for art shows, things like that, or you've got one large space that's sheltered. So this area here can be closed off to that area, but that area there is also sheltered from the weather. But if you want to make something big outside on a nice day, or you bring in some food trucks, what have you, you can use the whole area. It could be a car show, it could be a market. There was some rejuvenation of the existing landscape, and basically a screen for projections and kind of film nights. Basketball court, obviously you've got to have one of them, and a laneway because we're from Melbourne and it's all about the laneways. This is the grid begins to set up these cross kind of connections, and then the roof, which was designed originally in CLT timber, but we couldn't achieve for cost reasons, basically then veils this entire space, and then achieving a roof as economically and as kind of as beautifully as possible, I guess. On the groundscape, very much about introducing colour in a way in which you might begin to suggest different usages of space. This is something that we've been doing for a while now. Colour is kind of free, and it's a really great way of making and activating new environments. So we worked for Aspect Landscaping back in Melbourne when they did all the level crossings, and created these new kind of vibrant areas where there's a suggestion in the way in which you might interact with the floorscape. Graffiti artists also somehow respect these kind of things, so it became something that we were embedding into this project, which is still yet to happen. Early competition renders. And then this sign as well, which really is about the kind of community all coming together under one name, being proud of where they're from, and being proud to have a kind of civic landmark like this. The building during construction, so the roof sheeting is an Aramax material. They basically bring the roll former to the site and then a coil of metal, and they feed the metal into the roll former so you can achieve these sheets, which are 60 metres long and look fantastic when they're straight out of the batch. As I mentioned, the trusses ended up being steel due to cost. Australia is not really fantastic with CLT, as we saw earlier in the day. We would have just left it like this, but the council was worried about birds nesting. This is the building as it stands at the moment, with the trusses clad off. The 30-metre wide door, which can sort of lift up, and then the two spaces become one. This was at the opening just a couple of weeks ago, and as I mentioned, the floor yet to come through. So quite utilitarian materials, and really giving as much kind of flexibility as possible. I saw a post on Instagram this morning that the vegans are having a vegan festival there, so that's great. And hopefully it goes well. Hopefully it won't be the white elephant that some of the council members thought it was going to be, and people embrace it and choose to do, with the building what they want. So I think this is the last project, a tower. We're sort of trying to design towers these days. This one we did in collaboration with PTW and Collins and Turner. It was for a hotel in Sydney, 210 keys. Towers are great, but waterfalls are better. Sydney is really all about the beach, all about the beaches, all about the rock pools. So there's natural rock pools, then there's artificial ones that use the ocean swell to replenish them. When you're flying into Sydney, you just get this tapestry of swimming pools as you come in, and everyone has a swimming pool. Except Life Street, it doesn't have any swimming pools. It's, as I described, 50 shades of grey through there. There's a fantastic heritage building next door, the Sodeston building, which immediately had to be referenced. It's made out of this fantastic crinkle-cut sandstone, and obviously the podium had to respect the height of that building, and the idea was to basically continue the crinkle cutting of it, but then to begin to erode it. So Sydney is quite famous for its sandstone cliffs, and we thought this could be a fantastic sandstone infill that was beginning to be eroded at the bottom to create this new, quite vibrant garden underneath, but also to open up the square, because at this point you've got some footpath and you don't have any relief off the street. Taking that mass and then sort of eroding it even further to create this string and to give plants an aperture to attach to. These are just some early images that began to show the way in which it could be open to the north, and then sort of a bit more closed to the south. So as we get closer, you begin to reveal this forecourt or this courtyard that was all about different ways of using that. Again, roll in a food truck or have a market there, or someone selling some bangles or something. The forecourt allows a retail over two levels. Tweety was talking about, it's really difficult to get everyone up to the second level. So in this situation, we bring these two arms around and have these areas for a knockoff drink sort of around the square. You'll see there was a pool underneath, so this is one of the many pools. The forecourt also allows glass bricks to be placed on the ceiling so that as you're swimming around in the pool and all the other losers are going to work, you can see them kind of moving above you and you're just chilling out in the wellness centre. I'm really sorry these are so dark because these look amazing in reality, but the rendering company from Norway liked the space so much they turned it into their Christmas card for us. This is the tower as waterfall, so really about creating a facade that wasn't just entirely glass, creating a skin where you could begin to get the sun off the facade for thermal gain, but then also coming up with a way or a reason for doing that. Obviously, the lower you are, the more you're looking into the neighbouring buildings, so the less glass you actually need. And so as the building begins to rise out and the views become more relevant, so too does the glass. Some chicken there. This is one of the typical rooms, and we sort of suggested that they'd be pretty pared back and accessible. And then the rooftop itself, another pool. There's another 3 pools that I don't have time to go through, but really talking about the way in which the entire roof can become a rock pool, so that you can sit there and feel like you're not in Bligh Street, you're somewhere else. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodney Eggleston.